Okay, good morning, everyone. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our distinguished guest, Dr. Ralph Chami, for today's Health Sciences talk. Dr. Chami is an esteemed alumnus of the American University of Beirut. His remarkable journey has led him to become an assistant director at the IMF, and his commitment to addressing global changes is truly commendable. In addition to his significant role at the IMF, Dr. Chami is also the founder of two groundbreaking entities, which is a Blue-Green World and Rebalance Earth. And these organizations are at the forefront of realizing the value of our natural world, integrating it into our economic system, and addressing the twin risks of climate change and biodiversity loss. Our webinar today, titled "The Value of a Living Nature to Our Health and Economic Well-Being," promises to be an engaging and enlightening discussion. It will highlight how we arrived at our current situation, where the economy has often been perceived as separate from nature, and how this perspective has posed existential risks to humanity. Dr. Chami will showcase a new economic framework that will ensure sustainable and shared prosperity while fostering a positive impact on both nature and people. So the talk will take approximately around 45 minutes. And after which we will open the floor for your questions, creating an opportunity for an interactive change of ideas. So we look forward to an insightful session exploring the connections between our health, economic well-being, and the natural world. So thank you everyone for joining us, and mainly thank you, Dr. Chami, for accepting our invitation and giving us and waking up that early, 5 a.m. In the States, and joining us to give us this talk. So the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Salim. Please call me Ralph. Good morning, everyone. Let me get to the to the presentation. Let me see. Please let me know if you could see it.
Yes, perfect. We can see it.
Thank you, Salim, for the nice introduction, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for taking time from your busy schedules to log on. So what I would like to discuss with you is, let me get to the crux of it. Our economic system has a very good relationship with dead nature, and a very bad relationship with the living and thriving nature. So what I want to do today is make the case. Perhaps it's not a case that needs to be made, but somehow those of us working in this field feel like we always have to make the case for a living and thriving nature within the context of the economic system that we find ourselves in. So where do we start this conversation? First of all, let's start where we are right now. As you know very well, humanity is facing climate change risk, but we also find ourselves to be facing also the risk of losing nature and its biodiversity. These two risks are materializing in real time, and they're materializing due to human activity for the most part. Now, for those that work on climate change, or historically, if you like, since the Kyoto protocols and then the Paris Agreement of 2015, believe that to fight climate change, we need to reduce and draw down the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, or the carbon dioxide equivalents in the atmosphere. Those that work on natural capital or nature itself, they would advocate protecting and restoring nature as a way to reduce the bleeding that's taking place in nature. By the way, nature, we're not only losing nature and losing biodiversity, we're losing the ability of nature to resist climate change. I mean, if you think of the the forest fires in Canada this past summer and in Greece and other places, even the existing nature is unable, or it's getting less able to fight the climate change that's unraveling in front of us. So we are facing twin risks, and they're happening in real time. And the problem that we are facing in the 11th hour is we do not have the time to do things sequentially, meaning let's focus on one risk and then deal with the other. We need to do both at the same time. So the question is, how do we achieve both? How do we mitigate the risks to nature and fight climate change at the same time? Now, before we get into solutions, it's always good to know how we arrived here. The current economic paradigm that we find ourselves in, of which I'm guilty of having practiced for most of my professional life, is there's this sort of implicit belief with explicit actions that the economy somehow is outside of nature. In fact, in econ theory, we call it theory of externalities, and we think of nature, at least a living nature, as something that is outside the economy. And I present it to you this way so that you get the impression that somehow the economy can grow irrespective of what happens to nature. So we can extract with impunity, we can pollute with impunity. After all, nature is outside of the economy. What we find out is this growth that came at the expense of nature has resulted in impacting climate and what we call now the climate change risk, which has also boomeranged back to us in terms of natural capital risk, or the risk to loss of nature and its biodiversity. So this economic system, the current economic system that we are in a sense, is not sustainable. So how do we, what is the solution, okay, to this problem? Turns out that the solution has been there. The scientists have been pointing us in that direction for quite a while, but the rest of us were not reading the science textbooks or the papers. But if you come at it from the climate camp, there's the pledges that were made during the Paris Agreement of 2015 and afterwards to go carbon zero, carbon negative, or carbon neutral. So those that belong to this camp think of it in terms of reducing emissions. I like to think of this problem as a problem of the tap and the tub. So think of the emissions by the industry, by households, by man-made emissions. I'm not talking about natural emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So the idea that people that work on the climate risk think it's all about reducing, for the most part, reducing emissions. And therefore, by doing so, we help to reduce climate change risk. Those that come at it from the nature side, they believe that the solution to the problem is by protecting and restoring nature, because by definition, once we do that, we are able to reduce risk to nature and the risk to the loss of biodiversity. But the way they are looking at it is from a stock perspective. So when you talk to people in that space, they'll tell you, well, not only there's a problem of flow or a tap that's dripping carbon dioxide into the sky, and the sky, think of the sky as a tub. They tell you the tub is full. The tub has too much carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalents. And so the problem is not only about reducing emissions through change in technology and so forth, but also we need to actually drain the tub. So really the problem, and when you define it that way, then the science tells you this nature's approach to climate change, we can reduce it by about 38%. That comes out of the IPCC reports, 2022 and the AR6 and so forth. These reports all say that now that it's not enough to reduce emissions, but we really need to grab carbon from the atmosphere and bring it back into the biosphere. So what we need, so the solution is clear. We need to reduce our emissions and we need to grab carbon from the atmosphere. Reducing emissions, just to repeat myself one more time, is really about changing technology, going solar, moving away from hydrocarbons and so forth. But the carbon removal from the atmosphere is really about empowering nature to help us grab that carbon that used to be on land and bring it back into the biosphere. Ultimately, what we're really after, what we're saying, is a recognition that the current economic paradigm that saw itself as outside of nature is really the wrong one. The one that really is the correct paradigm, which our ancestors knew, and if you talk to indigenous people, that's what they practice, is that everything and everyone that you ever loved, to use the words by Carl Sagan in his famous essay, The Pale Blue Dot, he says, everyone and everything you ever knew resides on this pale blue dot in the middle of a huge existence, if you like. So ultimately what we want is to recognize that the economy and society and everything reside within a living nature. And as you can see, when you draw it in this manner, you can see that when nature is doing well, we do well. And when nature is stressed, we're going to be stressed. So nature, in a sense, is macro critical in the language of economics. But where do we start? I mean, if somebody says, okay, nature, how is nature helping us? And especially in terms of fighting climate change. The science will tell you, this all from science, that it's not only the trees that grab carbon from the atmosphere, but it's also, after all, the planet is 4/5 ocean and water. So in the oceans, there's something called the phytoplankton, and these are microscopic organisms. I don't have to tell you that, you guys are the scientists, but they grab so much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, equivalent to about 33 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year, and that's the work of about 4 Amazon forests per year. Closer to shore, you have seagrass, salt marsh, mangroves, kelp forest, seaweed, and so forth. And those bodies, living systems, fix tremendous amount of carbon in themselves and in the sediments. And they do a lot of other things too. They provide for flood protection, they enhance fish stocks. So they provide a lot of ecosystem services that are that go beyond just the climate to providing food security, stabilizing people and their land, among others. The open ocean, I refer to it usually as the orphan. That's the part of the ocean belongs to nobody and therefore belongs to everybody. According to the scientists, they've kept data since 1870 till now. It has fixed over 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide, and that's suspended between 1,000 meters deep in the water all the way down to the bottom. So nature, flora is providing quite a bit of help in the fight against climate change. This is a more recent paper coming out of Yale. This is Oswald Schmidt and his team, about a year ago, published a paper in Nature showing that not only is it that flora, that paper, by the way, is kind of, they canvass the literature, so some of that work predates the 2023 paper. But basically, they're showing that's not only flora that grabs carbon and fights climate change, but fauna too. And they estimated the contribution of 9 of the trophic species, including, as you can see, wildebeest, sea otters, werewolves, elephants, whales, fish, and so forth. So what you want to take from this is that nature, be it flora or fauna, interact. We call that biodiversity. And that beautiful web of life is really helping to stave off climate change if we give it a chance. This is work that started with Andy Pershing's 2010 paper. This comes out of our paper of 2019, where we were looking at what the scientists had figured out is that the whales, these are the great whales, the 9 species of the great whales, they grab so much carbon on their body, equivalent to about 1,500 trees per whale on average. And through the way they forage and the way they feed, they like to eat krill, and krill likes to eat phytoplankton. And so I would like you to think of a triangle, if you like, the base of the triangle. The whale eats krill, and the krill likes to feed on phytoplankton. And phytoplankton, which is where the biological life of the ocean starts, and I just mentioned it grabs about 33 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year. For the phyto to survive, it needs phosphorus, nitrogen, and also needs iron. And where do you find those nutrients? Aside from runoff from rivers and movement of wind over land, in the Southern Ocean, where you can't, where there are no rivers to think of, or movement of wind over land, since everything is up until now is ice and snow, they find those nutrients in the poop or the fecal plumes of the whales, which is really an incredible thing. So if you have a closed loop, you have the whales feeding on krill. These are the great whales, and the krill feeding on phytoplankton, and phytoplankton needing the fecal plumes of the whales. So in a sense, the whales are fertilizing their own food. They fertilize the phyto. There's more phyto, then there's more krill. Therefore, there's more food for the whales. But another way of looking at this is that the whales are also allies in the fight against climate change by grabbing carbon on their body, and also indirectly through their fertilization of the phytoplankton. This is really work that started with Fabio Berzaghi's famous paper in Nature Journal, where he and his colleagues figured out that in the Congo Basin, the elephants, these are not the savanna ones that when you go to Kenya or South Africa to look at elephants, you're most likely looking at savanna elephants. These are their cousins, and usually hidden. They live in the forests. And it turns out the study that they conducted and published in Nature in 2019, subsequently they published a few other papers on the same topic. They uncovered that the forest elephants have a proclivity for eating plants that are low in fiber and therefore high in protein, and they leave alone plants that are high in fiber, which means high in carbon. And so they have taste buds just like us, and that's the food that they like to eat. So they leave alone plants that are that have a high carbon content. Also, the way they walk around in the forest, they traipse on small shoots, giving more space to older growth to sort of to get more sunlight and more water and more rain. And as a result, they calculated that the contribution of forest elephants in terms of carbon sequestration in the forest goes between 7% and 14%, depending on the concentration of whale per square kilometer. So what this is really, all I'm saying so far is that science tells us that nature is critical. It is critical in terms of fighting climate change. It's critical in terms of providing other ecosystem services. But when I say nature here, I'm talking about a living and thriving nature, not a dead nature. So in the language of economics, of course, we like to think, we use the word, it's macro critical. That's from the science side. Now the question is, how do you, science is telling us living nature, thriving nature is valuable. When you use the word valuable, people like me, economists and finance say, okay, can I put a dollar amount to how valuable it is? If you wanted to do something, an exercise of this sort, where do you start? Well, I will focus mostly on carbon here just because there's a carbon market, but I'm happy to talk about biodiversity markets and new markets that are coming online. So we want to get a ballpark figure as to how valuable in dollar terms is nature. The reason we want to do that is because when you live in my world, and my world is the policy world, my world is the markets world, if you cannot translate the science into the language of dollars and cents, then we continue to exist in silos and we're not talking to each other. People that I spent 25 years at the IMF, in the policy world, it always boils down to a cost-benefit analysis. So if you want to engage the policy world or the financial markets or the private sector, in order to convince them that nature is valuable, you somehow need to translate the language of science into the language that they can relate to, and that's the language of dollars and cents, fortunately or unfortunately. So how do we do so? Well, we can start with the carbon market. And the carbon market, when I was at the IMF, I recall being that the price of carbon was really close to zero, as you can see here from the graph, for a very long time, until we get to the Paris Accords in 2015, where the agreements were, yes, the world decided we need to go carbon zero, carbon negative, carbon neutral. And the question is, with what? If you make those promises, how are you going to fulfill that promise? So partly it is through offset, partly through reducing our emissions, but the other part is we need nature. We need nature to grab all that carbon from the atmosphere and bring it back to where it used to be. But from the perspective of an economist, that means it created those commitments to go carbon zero or neutral or negative by 2050 created the demand. So the demand in the market came to being right around, I mean, one could make the argument, well, it started with the Kyoto protocol, that's fine, but really the price took off, and I was at the IMF looking at it, seeing how the price was eking up, and today's price in the compliance market is over $100 per ton. And if you look at the futures market, the price of carbon is expected to be in the hundreds, if not in the thousands of dollars per ton. So, but I just want to mention here that when they made the commitments to go whatever it is, neutral or negative or zero by 2050 for most of these countries. Had they made the commitment to go all of this by 2100, then the price of carbon would still be zero, and I wouldn't be here giving this seminar. So they made a commitment to do all this by 2050, but those commitments were predicated on actions that should have been taken at that point in time. But what they did, they met, they hugged, they kissed, they signed kumbaya, and then they went out and everybody continued to pollute and extract and destroy with impunity. And so what happened is, and of course those commitments were to avoid breaching the 1.5 degrees delta. So when you do something like that, it's like a train coming at you, picking up speed, because it's a commitment to a date and time, but you don't do what you're supposed to do, so that date and time moves closer. So if you look at the scientific papers that were coming out, they're saying, wait, guys, it's no longer 2050. We really need to do something by 2040. But of course, again, they met, and I was at COP25, I was at COP26 and 27, and soon I'll be going to COP28. There's still more talk and more hugging, and Greta is very right, a lot of blah, blah, blah. And that means the day of reckoning is moving towards us at a very fast speed. And that's why the latest reports are saying we really need to do something by 2030, which is just around the corner. But that's one way of looking at it. The other way, that means the demand to do something is skyrocketing. It's urgent, it's here and now, and it translates into higher prices for technologies that will be able to help us stave off the climate calamity. Now, once we know that once we have a price for the carbon sequestration services. So let me go back here. So when you say, okay, the price of carbon is $20 per ton, or $50 or $100, then we can go back to the science and say, okay, if I can figure out how much flow of carbon is being sequestered by a tree, by a seagrass, salt marsh, or by the animals, I can pretty much put a price on the carbon sequestration services of these systems. And this is what we did in 2019. Colleagues of mine and I basically studied the science on the whales, figured out how much the whales were capturing on their body in terms of carbon over their lifetime, and of course, and how much carbon sequestration they were helping in when they fertilize phyto on a flow basis. And we came up that the value, the expected discounted present value of the lifetime services of a great whale on average is about $3 million. That number now, if you when we did that work, the price of carbon was $25 or something like that. Price of carbon today per ton is over 100. So you can imagine what the value is today. With Fabio Berzaghi, these are the papers we published at the time. Fabio asked me, can you value the services of these elephants? And so we used their population growth model, and then we did mathematical modeling of on the financial side, and the expected discounted present value of the lifetime earnings, if you like, of the whale would be about $2.6 million when the price of carbon was about $30 or 30 some dollars. Okay, so we can do the same also with flora, excuse me. So this is work we were doing in Florida. We were looking at what is the value of mangroves. We were trying to bring back mangroves into the Everglades, and the estimate at the time was $1.6 million per square kilometers. Salt marshes, about 1.5 million per square kilometers. This is very recent work with Carlos Duarte, Professor Carlos Duarte, who's the father of blue carbon. And it's very interesting when we started working with Carlos on what is the value of the global biomass of seagrass worldwide. But what Carlos, in about 30 papers of his on seagrass, shows you is that seagrass grows exponentially for 50 years and then continues to grow at a constant rate forever, which is really remarkable when think of an exponential curve, and then basically at some point it tapers off, but that growth stays on forever. So imagine if you had a company that can grow at an exponential rate for 50 years, then at a constant rate forever. What would be the present value? What would be the value of the company today? At the minimum, in terms of just carbon sequestration, is over $1 trillion. Okay. Corals do not really grab carbon on net. On net, they are neutral, but they provide many other services. And this is work by colleagues of ours showing that the benefit is about $36 billion a year. So what this all is to show you is the first pillar of science tells us how valuable is a living and thriving nature to us, but also we can value it in terms of dollar terms, how valuable it is to maintain and to protect and rejuvenate a living and thriving nature. And the dollar amount is very important because this is where the economists and policymakers start to really pay attention. So all I've said is nature is a great ally in fighting climate change, and it's financially valuable. By the way, just to go back here, the seagrass here, I just focus on the carbon, but we have also work showing the implications of healthy seagrass on fish stocks. And we know what is the value of fish stocks. So you can look at what is the value. You can add to this 1 trillion, another trillion in terms of impact of seagrass on enhancing fish stocks. Also, seagrass is provides a great defense against flooding, and we can easily calculate what is the value of staving off wave function, wave activity, and protection of shores by seagrass, salt marsh, and mangroves. And you can add those ecosystem services, the value of them, to the value of carbon sequestration. So nature is a great ally in fighting climate change, but also in providing amazing ecosystem services, which have positive impact on our health and also on our economic well-being. Now, so far I've shown you two things: science, which is telling us how valuable nature is, and we economists and finance people can sort of give a ballpark figures in terms of the value. But you would think, okay, Ralph has made the case, money should be pouring in to protect nature and help it, help to restore nature. In fact, the reality is not so. This is what you see here in the column, this one that I'm pointing up to, is how much is needed to protect nature on a yearly basis, close to $1 trillion. of which only this much is money comes through philanthropy. And there's a bit that comes from governments, but the gap really is about, depending on whose report that you're going to read, this is from the Paulson Institute, tells you the gap is between $200 and $700 billion a year, just to protect nature and allow it to restore. So where's the money going to come from? Because if we don't do anything, we're going to lose nature. And if we lose nature, we're going to lose the fight against climate change. So, you know, people can look at this, and some people like to think, well, we need to proselytize some more. We really need to tell people how important it is. And I keep responding by saying, well, people vote with their money, and they're telling us this is how much I'm willing to give you voluntarily from a philanthropic point of view or altruism point of view. Governments, as you can tell, they're distracted with all kinds of things, and they're not willing, or they're strapped for cash, so they're not going to pour any money into protecting nature. The only thing left for us is, can we make the case for the private sector that they have an incentive in the protection and rejuvenation of nature? That's what I want to focus on, because that's where my work sits right now, is nature an investable proposition? Okay, so how do we go about making that argument? Now, before you go to the private sector, so you want to make the case that the private sector should invest in nature from a profit motive, not from altruism, not from philanthropy, from a purely sort of a profit-driven motive. The first thing that the private sector is going to say, well, Ralph, you want to sell me the services of what? Trees, okay, or the services of seagrass or salt marsh or mangroves or even elephants or whales. First question they're going to ask you, well, do you own the asset? Because you're calling nature now an asset. Well, do you own it? So the idea of provenance becomes very important. And that's why if you're following the work on carbon markets or nature markets, there's a lot of work, a lot of back and forth on the issue of provenance. So some people like to, argue that nature should have its own rights. Some would like to confer personhood on nature. For example, in Costa Rica, they conferred personhood on bees. In New Zealand, they conferred personhood on a river. In Panama, they conferred personhood on sea turtles. And when you confer personhood on an entity, on a living nature, or fauna or flora, that creature or the flora or fauna now has rights. And we have responsibilities towards it, just like we have responsibilities towards each other. And so what it also does, it says if any harm is done to, let's say, the bees, there are legal ramifications as well as financial ramifications. You could also look at nature as an asset. And for something, why is that important? Because if you take nature, living nature, and you are able to convert it to asset, then it enters the balance sheet of the country or the group or whoever owns that asset, and therefore it will change their net worth. And at that point in time, the markets will start to pay attention and try to provide services, including insurance services, to protect the asset. So the idea of valuing something in science and then you value it financially is not enough. You really need to ascertain the ownership of the asset. But once you do that, then you're really talking about new wealth. So, and I'll show you examples of things that we are working on. But it's very important because I get asked this question all the time. Oh, Ralph, we have forests. We have seagrass, we have salt marsh, we have whatever. And I keep saying, do you own it? Can you prove that you own it? If you can't prove that you own it, then that's called codification in the law. Then the valuation plus the ownership allows it to become an asset, which enters the balance sheet of the country or the indigenous people or whoever own, or the farmer who may own the natural asset. It now becomes a new asset class. All right, so how does the market, for those of you thinking, what is Ralph talking about? How does it work? Well, right now we have companies, think of Google, let's take Google for a minute. They've made commitments to go carbon zero or carbon neutral or carbon negative by a certain date. So think of the buyer of, what they want is, since, okay, they can reduce their emissions as much as they can, but they still need, it's not enough to go carbon zero. So they need to buy carbon sequestration services of nature from someone. So think of the buyer here, could be Google, could be Microsoft, could be a bank, could be even people themselves. They want to offset, the word is they want to offset their carbon footprint. So they're willing to pay money for the services of flora or fauna. It could be mangroves, could be whales, could be elephants, could be seagrass. What you're doing here, you're not selling the asset. So please let me, the first principle of our work, never sell the asset, meaning if somebody owns the mangroves or seagrass, you don't sell the mangroves or seagrass, you're just leasing their services. You retain the ownership, such that the money goes to look after the asset itself. In this case, let's say you're purchasing the carbon from seagrass in the Bahamas. This is a project I have in the Bahamas with colleagues. And so you have, let's say, Google purchasing the carbon sequestration services of seagrass. So the government of the Bahamas is going to restore or replant seagrass, and this additional seagrass will grab carbon on behalf of Google. And in return, Google will pay money, but that money has to go to look after the seagrass, because you have to make sure that it's alive and well and doing well. And the money should go to the people also involved. Now, for this market to really work, we really need sensors and technologies to make sure that the asset is doing well, and to track its behavior, its physiology over time. What's happening to it? Is salinity changing? Is temperature changing? Are the seas rising? And other things. Also, we use blockchain technology in order to make sure that we can track what's happening to the payments from the buyer to the seller. And so you have a two-way verifiability. The sellers can know who's buying from them, and the buyers can see where their money is going, not into the pockets of a corrupt politician, but really is going to look after the seagrass, and the people that look after the seagrass could be the indigenous people or local communities. Now, if it's the seagrass or salt marsh, as I said before, when you are investing in seagrass, when you have healthy seagrass, you have healthy sea turtles, because sea turtles feed on seagrass. And when you have healthy sea turtles, you have also healthy, the apex predator there is the tiger shark. So you have also a healthy shark population, you have healthy sea turtles, and the fish stocks, because fish love to nest, put their eggs and lay their eggs in seagrass and hide from predators there. And so what you're really talking about is you're going beyond. Google is not only purchasing carbon of the new seagrass, but they're also investing in biodiversity, which means the interaction of flora and fauna. And when you have healthy seagrass, you're creating resilience in nature. When you create resilience in nature, you're staving, for example, by staving, you're staving off flooding, you're enhancing fish stocks, which means food security. You're also helping stabilize people on their land. So what Google would be able to say, hey, I'm not only offsetting my carbon footprint, but also my investment in these carbon credits is also helping us to meet SDGs, at least 138, 13, 14, 15. I can think of others that are also achieved through this market transaction. So really what Google is buying is carbon credits, biodiversity credits, and cultural credits. You can put them all under the sort of the nature credits. This is how the market would work. There are a lot of details I'm leaving out. If there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer. Here's an example of our work in Bahamas. You see here in Nature Communications, that was a paper by Carlos Duarte and a group called Beneath the Waves. They published it a year ago. It's really incredible. They use tiger sharks to map the seafloor of the Bahamas. If you've ever been to the Bahamas, the land area is very small, but their ocean area is huge, and it's mostly seagrass. The Bahamas is sitting on 30% of the global mass of seagrass, and they did something really, really cool. Rather than diving to figure out how much seagrass are using subs and so forth, they outfitted tiger sharks with cameras. I was on the boat. I can explain to you how they did this really incredible, ingenious way of, and with 365 camera, and then they let the tiger sharks do what they do, which is chase sea turtles. And those guys spend most of their time just moving around the seagrass. And so they map the seafloor in no time of the Bahamas. The camera has a timing device. At a certain point, it sort of pops up to the surface where they're able to grab and collect the data. So what is it that they found? They found that Bahamas is sitting on 93,000 square kilometers of seagrass, and historically they had an additional 40%. If you know not anything about how the carbon market works, it's something called additionality. You can only be paid if you have a field that used to be this big and it shrunk to this, and now you're trying to restore whatever you've lost. In their case, it's 40,000 square kilometers that they can actually restore. That delta is what you can sell as carbon credits. Or if you have a field of whatever it is, and it's under threat from human activity, and if you can commit to protecting it in whole or in part, that whole or in part, you can sell carbon credits against. In the case of the Bahamas, I was asked to calculate, my group was asked to calculate the value of the additionality, and it's $170 billion, imagine. So, which, if you divide this per capita, and they're about 350,000 Bahamians, that will make it per capita one of the richest countries on the face of the planet. In the case of the Bahamas, what they've decided to do is what I have here in the graph on the right-hand side. Rather than do restoration, they decided to do avoidance of loss. And without going into too much detail, we can using our techniques, which involves nonlinear projection models, we can project the amount of carbon that the 93,000 can actually produce through protection over time. Okay, so this is how. So what would happen here if you say, well, how does this really work? Google would be buying the carbon of the seagrass of the Bahamas, and the money should be coming in to look after the seagrass and to look after the people of Bahamas. This is work that we spent 3 years with Lee White, Professor Lee White, who is the Minister of the Environment.
I'm sorry, Ralph.
I'm
sorry
almost
to interrupt you. We have 5 more minutes if we
Wonderful.
can.
Yeah, wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm almost there. Thank you. So this is work in Gabon, just to show you we can do the same thing with the elephants. Gabon had done an amazing job of protecting its elephants. Public information shows you they had 57,000 currently. Actually, there's a bit more than that now, elephants, and they can go to about 190. And if we were to value the stock itself, it's about $12 billion. And if we allow the elephant population to go back to what it used to be, you're adding another $11 billion. So Gabon could be sitting on $33 billion just from selling the biodiversity credits of the elephants. That's about $1 billion a year in terms of income. Just to show you that this is what we can do on a sort of a country basis. But to kind of give you a macro picture of what's going on, also globally, there's really slow progress on climate risk, despite all the rhetoric that you hear. There are issues of there are too many prices. If you buy carbon from Kenya, you pay them $5, but companies buying carbon from a carbon capture machine, they're paying $1,200 for the same molecule. And that's really not helpful in terms of convergence on fighting climate change. What's really missing here in the overall picture is really a global vision of what tomorrow ought to look like. We're telling people, we're scaring people a lot. I'm really worried about scaring people too much to the point that they will tune us out. So really what we're in need is a global vision of how we want to live for tomorrow. And the global vision is very easy. If we were to invest in nature, in a living nature, so if you're on the sales side, if you're the Bahamas, as I showed you, if you're the government, you're going to make a lot of money. By the way, that revenue is acyclical, is not business cycle related, and it has nothing to do with, God forbid, there's another COVID pandemic or anything. So that money will continue to come in. So it's a great way of diversifying the economy. If you're on the buying side of the carbon, if you're like Google and Microsoft and all these companies, you are reducing your carbon footprint, you're enhancing your ESG score, and you're meeting your SDGs, many of them. Who else benefits from this? Well, nature itself, because this is all about investing in a living and thriving nature. So, the buyer wins, the seller wins, nature wins, and of course, the IPLCs is indigenous people or local communities. People will win, because when we create resilience in nature, we create resilience in the people. We need and stabilizes people in their land. So as you can see, this is what I would like to think would be the new economic paradigm that recognizes the value of a living and thriving nature for the benefit of nature itself and ourselves and our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chami, for this amazing talk. Now we will open the floor for discussion, for questions. If you have any question, please raise your hand and I will call upon you to give. So we have the first question from Dr. Habib.
Yes,
Hello.
thank you. Can you hear echo?
Yes.
Okay, so I will disconnect from one location, but let me find out the way. Okay, what's happening here? Apologies for this mishap. I did not want to miss anything, and I had to step out of my desktop, so I connected on my mobile phone as well. I am Rima Habib from the Department of Environmental Health. Thank you for this comprehensive seminar, Ralph. It's very informative. As you know, I'm not an economist, but I do appreciate the focus, and it's such a timely topic as well. I know the good intentions there, and I know what you meant by saying that nature can be an excellent ally or a good ally to fight climate change. What I get concerned about is how the people or the governments or the industries would look at that in the fight for climate change from a policy perspective, especially. Because they would, that the skeptics and the climate change denial has been rampant over the years, because the economy or the economists, not the economists, I don't want to point finger at economists. I know that they are very good people and you are one of them, but industries especially, and people with big profits, and the oil industry and so on, would like to capitalize on these messages to tell us that we can go our normal way, we can go business as usual, because nature will take care of itself. So if you could tell us how to make sure to answer them properly in this case, based on all the data that you have provided us with. Thank you.
Thank you, Rima. This is a concern that is shared by many, and it's a well positioned concern. So the issue is really some people like some aspect of it is called greenwashing. So let's kind of build the case. First thing is they cannot say that they cannot say that nature will take care of itself, because nature is dying. All the evidence is we are losing. I mean, I did not bring in evidence by IUCN and others about how the fast pace of losing the species, but you know all of that being this is your field. So the evidence, the scientific evidence, is that nature is we're losing nature in quantity, in quality, because its ability to resist climate change itself is at risk, and we're losing biodiversity. Now, so that the science there is damning and pointing to the direction of, and if we lose nature, there's no sense in doing anything else, because if we lose the oceans, I don't see how we're going to be able to survive. That's one. The other part of your question that also concerns me is the idea that, oh, well, business as usual. I will continue to pollute with impunity, and I buy a few carbon credits. Maybe that was really your question. There is really a problem, and that's a problem of policy. That's why I call it the tap and the tub problem. And we've written a paper on that, showing that what's really missing is the policy that says to companies such as the oil industry and others, you need to show me a credible plan of how you intend to get off the oil binge. Okay, so some companies are, some companies can change their technology, but others, like if you're thinking of the airline industry, they cannot, up until now, they don't have the technology to replace their reliance on hydrocarbons. So for those that can switch, they really need a credible plan that shows how they intend to reduce their emissions to zero. That's the gross emissions, right? But that's not enough, because I just showed you the problem that it's not a problem of emissions, it's also a problem of the stock. And the stock, that is the buildup from previous emissions over hundreds of years. Okay, and that is the stock that is actually causing the warming. So you have the flow, but that's a flow, but then you have the stock sitting there. So even the industries that make commitments to go carbon zero, they still need to buy the carbon credits, and the carbon credits should only come through nature. That's one. Now, for those industries that can't wean themselves away from oil in the short run, they still need to have a credible plan of how they're going to do that over the next 10, 20 years. And at the same time, they still have to purchase carbon credits by investing in nature. So really what I'm saying is the policy ought to be that every company should be carbon negative, not carbon zero or carbon neutral. Now, the question that you raise also, who is going to say that? I was in London quite recently, and I was meeting with some regulators. The regulators in Europe have woken up and told companies, listen, you had 40 years to comply and you haven't. So the day of reckoning is coming very quickly on a lot of the big and medium-sized companies. And the problem that they are facing right now is many of these companies, if you're Google and Microsoft, of course, you have the money and the technology to know what to do, but many medium and small-sized enterprises don't even know how to do it, let alone do it, and don't even have the resources to do it. In the literature itself, it's called transition risk. There's a risk of transition that many companies will fold. Because regulators now have said, okay, we're in panic mode and all the regulations are coming right now. We're no longer waiting for you to comply. And that itself could create risk. So the problem is quite complex. What I would like to add to your concern is the concern that who is in charge? Right now, we have a global public bad, and we know from, first of all, for theorem of economics, when you have a global public good or public bad, you cannot leave it to the markets to find the solution. That's standard first course any student, I taught for 10 years, actually a lot longer than that. That's the first thing you learn for welfare theorem in economics. When you have a public good, you cannot leave it to the markets to decide. We need a social planner, and right now we do not have that. We have many. That's what I was trying to say. On the global side, there are too many, to my mind, too many rules and regulations and best efforts, and companies are looking, which one do I follow? Do I follow TNFD? Do I follow the Integrity Forum? Do I follow the carbon? Which one do you want me to follow? So there's room there for someone to step in, some entity to step in globally And we've done that in the past. There are examples when we came together to decide these are the rules of the game.
Okay, we have another question from Dr. Nwahid.
Ralph, again, it was so good to see you, and this was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. I'd like to follow up on what Rima asked, but practically, you've told us that you've attended the previous COP meetings and you're attending the upcoming one. So how optimistic are you, Ralph, about the dynamics of what's happening in these meetings? And do you find a place to push your ideas and this agenda in these global meetings and powerful ones? Thank you.
So yeah, so at COP25, I remember it was in Madrid. I was invited to come and talk about our work on the whales at the time. And people were saying, why are you here? This is a climate meeting. Because at the time, it was about climate. You see, the climate silo paid no attention to nature. Then I was invited to IUCN in Marseille, and all of the nature people showed up. None of the climate people showed up, just to show you. Okay. And then COP26, they met and they looked at each other. Oh, we have something in common, which is human activity. COP27, if you read the narrative, it's fascinating. COP27, they said, oh my goodness, the ocean may be the solution to the problem. It's only at COP27. So I'm very, I understand Greta when she used to say, you guys are all about blah, blah, blah. She's absolutely right. Because the actions are not matching the words, the rhetoric. And this, I mean, and you can look at it from so many angles. We cannot play games with nature. Nature is coming at us. There's no shortcuts to it. There's no, trying to con nature or say, well, maybe not. Maybe we can dodge this bullet. We won't dodge it. We're seeing it all over. We're seeing it all over. So does that, do you feel that sense of urgency? In some quarters, yes. When I was in London, as I was saying, there were regulators, because my work is very much, I work with indigenous people. I work with governments. And I have to always keep track of the macro environment. And I can give you examples. This is very important to know where is the macro going, meaning where is the discourse, where is it going, which direction? And what I learned from the regulators there, as I said before, that they are now in panic mode. Because let me give you an example. In California, and some of you may already know this, some of the insurance companies have moved out of real estate. Imagine the big players, okay, have said we will not insure any new homes in California. Now imagine when insurance companies are moving out of real estate, as you know very well, for those of you that bought homes in the US, if you can't get insurance, you can't buy a house. So now the real estate market in that part of California where the big insurance companies have moved out, you can't buy a house. That means all the real estate, anything related to real estate, all the businesses, I've seen their value go through the floor. So what's happening is, irrespective of what the regulators are doing or are not doing, businesses are starting to look at what used to be a AAA business, and they're looking at it saying, no, it's not AAA anymore. This is a highly risky environment. By the way, same thing is happening in Florida. In many parts in the United States, insurance companies, and I keep track of what they're doing, they're moving out of this. So the answer to your question, do you see that urgency? I see it more coming from the business side rather than from the regulator side, or the governments are stuck in sort of, many of the governments around the world are highly indebted. They're trying to figure out how to service their debt. And to them, when you talk to them about climate and this, they'll be like, this is a luxury good I can't afford. I have to feed my people first, right? But I keep trying always to put it back to them and say, your people's health is very much linked You know what you're trying to reduce the debt because you want to reduce the burden on your people. But part of the reducing the burden on your people is having healthy people and investing in their health. And their health is very much linked to climate. And there's a new paper just came out yesterday. The link, you know, as if we didn't know that, but between climate and health. So governments are some of them are there, some of them are not there. But the businesses are there. They're getting pressure from investors, from the shareholders. They're getting pressure from potential employees. They're getting pressure from their consumer base. At least in the US and in Europe, what you see are consumers saying to companies, "Are you a polluter? What is your impact? Beyond the carbon, what is your impact on the environment?" So the companies, and how do you get to know this? By talking to sustainability officers in those companies. They're all looking for a new narrative that they can be part of. But the terrain is full of well-wishing, well-meaning efforts that are really dizzying. Too many principles are out there, too many, you know, depending which one you want to read. So that is, you know, you see the industry saying, well, which one should I be following? But the bottom line is being affected. This is what matters for the industry, for the private sector. And when you get insurance companies to act, that to me is that is it. That's the canary in the mine. That is how I know that the market is moving in the right direction. Regulators always play catch up. Always been the history of all regulation is a catch up. Once they see the industry moving, they rush ahead trying to catch up. It's called the regulatory cycle, by the way. But even then, I'll tell you, we are nowhere near where we ought to be, given that we are in the 11th hour. Am I hopeful for COP28? Yes, in the sense that we have to build on what was agreed on COP27. But as you can see also at COP28, there's issues of social justice. There's issues of global south, global north, because the global south will tell you, why should I be the one who we're not, because remember, there's a positive relationship between growth and pollution. So the global south is saying, I need to come out of COVID. I have suffered for so long, and you're telling me I shouldn't be growing too much because I will add to pollution. Well, hey, you global north, you polluted. All that stock, it belongs to you, which is true, by the way. That's a legacy stock.
Exactly.
So why should it be on me? But that's why I'm saying this, what you're seeing, this is the tragedy of the commons. See, this is exactly the tragedy of the commons as an example for you. You have a global bad, and what we're telling countries is, you decide for yourself. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to say, I'm going to look after my own interest. But who's looking after the world's interest? The planet, the planetary interest. There has to be an entity that does that. We need to come together. And that global role is missing so far. My own institution, IMF, is not playing that role. The World Bank is not playing that role. Who's playing that role? I really don't know. Have we played roles like that in the past? And the answer is yes. I can give you many examples of when the world came together and decided, okay, these are the rules of the game. Are we there yet? No.
Thank you.
So with that, we come to an end of this very interesting seminar. Thank you, Dr. Chami, for a very open discussion and a very informative session. Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Before we leave, sorry, Samer, can I just ask Ralph if it's possible that he talks with our students online about the same issue, the same topic, since he attended? Yes. Could you?
This is meant to inspire, not to scare. This is meant to say, look in this and see what by the way, I had a brief conversation with colleagues in Lebanon. I kept saying, you know, we can rewild Lebanon. This is the language we use here, meaning, you know, replant and all this stuff, and get the world to pay for it if you like.
Right.
Imagine, right? Yeah. Because we can go back and reforest all of Lebanon, even reclaim the waters, and I know, I mean, I work with governments all over the world, and I keep asking myself, why am I not working with Lebanon, my own country? But
Yeah.
anyway, so there is tremendous opportunities there, and I'd be more than happy to carry on this conversation with whoever is interested.
Excellent.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you very much.
for this
I'll get your
opportunity. Thank
email.
you, Salim. Thank
I'll
you
get
all.
your email
You,
from
Dr.
from Salim, and I just included my email in the chat box, so I will be talking to you about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
for your
Rima.
time.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.